This army is completely busted. Don't even bother trying to play against it, is what I would say if I was super lame. But no, today I'm going to break down what is admittedly the strongest detachment in the game, and we're going to figure out how the heck we are going to beat it. Just like all the time in Warhammer 40k, there's always going to be a new hotness. There's always going to be something new that's super powerful, it's super strong, and there's always going to be a counter to it. What's actually very exciting is that the current strongest detachment in the game, Armoured Speartip, was just released to us last week, is actually one of the more easily counterable strongest armies in the game that we've really ever had. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. This detachment, it's got some freaking paws on it. It's going to throw hands and it's going to hurt. But if you play intelligently and you understand the weaknesses and the pressure points of the army, then you're going to be just freaking fine. That's what we're going to do right now. So let's get into it. What is the freaking threat that the Armored Speartip is really demonstrating? Well, here is the best example of it right here in this picture that I've got down below for you. So effectively, you're going to take a Land Raider. It's going to have Scout 9. Boom, 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 boom. It's going to spend a CP to move through a wall, and it's going to spend a CP to allow it to advance and still disembark models. This can give it up to an 18-inch advance, because we're assuming Land Raider, Redeemer, or Crusader for the 12-inch move. You take the 3-inch disembark for the unit that gets out of it. In this detachment, when you end an advance or a normal move with a transport, you can then make either a D6 or a D3 plus 3-inch normal move after you disembark. So that basically gives you an effective range of almost a 36-inch turn 1 move, and then you can still freaking charge. Now, it does cost 2 CP, and it is with extremely expensive units, but it is the most bonkers threat projection in the entire game. It's a nightmare scenario, and it's going to make a lot of players feel helpless. And then those players are going to make mistakes that are going to cost them the entire game. But here's the deal, guys. Every single detachment in the game has weaknesses and has points of attack, and this one has some glaring weaknesses that we're going to talk about right now. I'm going to show you how to beat this detachment. This is not a detachment review video. I am going to go a little bit over what the detachment does just so we have some base knowledge. But if you want a full detachment review video, tons of other people have done those. I'm here to help you get better at the game and actually win, not just watch, I don't know, like information porn. So let's jump on into it. All right, here's the 10,000 foot view of how the detachment actually works and what you need to worry about, and then we'll discuss exactly what we're going to do to counter. Okay, so effectively, after the transport does a normal move or an advanced move, when you get out of it, you can do either a D6-inch move or a D3 plus 3-inch move if you're getting out of a heavy transport. Heavy transports are defined as a transport that is 14 wounds or more and is not an aircraft. This means Land Raiders, Repulsor Executioners, and Storm Ravens that start the game in hover mode. That's actually really, really important, because Storm Ravens that start the game in hover mode do in fact lose the aircraft keyword, which will allow them to count as a heavy transport for the purposes of this detachment. So basically, all these guys go, whenever these transports end their normal move, you can disembark, and then you can get an additional D3 plus 3-inch move to get extra lines of sight if you're trying to shoot, or get extra distance if you're trying to charge. It's a very, very big deal. And then there's this enhancement, which we already spoke about, which gives you a 9-inch scout move on any transport. It's real good on Storm Ravens and Land Raiders for obvious reasons. All right, then they've got some key stratagems that are really important for you to recognize. It can give them the ability to disembark even if the transport advances. They've got a stratagem that gives them the ability to move through walls and ignore engagement range for models. They've also got another stratagem called Machine Wrath, which is disgusting, that when used on a heavy transport, it allows the transport to make a normal move before it is removed from the table. And this is before you disembark models as well. So it's actually a broken stratagem, but whatever. We're going to figure out how to play around it anyway. Then they've also got a what's called Rapid Embarkation, which will allow them to jump back inside of a transport at the end of the fight phase. That's any fight phase, your fight phase, or your opponent's fight phase, which is very important. And then lastly, they got a little bit of damage boost that if you get out of a heavy transport, you could just be +1 to hit and wound for the rest of the phase. So that's also quite useful. Now, here's the deal about this detachment. The transports make everything operate. So it's going to be transport heavy, and it's going to be big transport heavy. It's going to be nothing but Land Raiders, repulsors, rep X's, and storm ravens. And if I'm going to be very real about it, it's going to be basically land raiders and storm ravens, because you're going to notice that there's some weaknesses right away, even though they have insane stratagems. All right, so let's kind of put these together, what makes the detachment feel unkillable, and then I'll do the actual things that we're going to attack, the weak points. All right, so this is why it's feeling unbeatable. People get the initial instinct that they're just going to shoot the transports, and then your opponent's going to do that machine wrath where they get that free normal move, and then you're just completely screwed because you're just giving your opponent free movement. Now, this is a really strong ability. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It totally is, but there are things that we can absolutely do to account for it. The next instinct that you're going to have is that, hey, my opponent is super, super fast. He gets to pressure all of this. Well, so maybe I want to back away just to make sure that they don't get to hit me. Guys, have you ever seen a boxing match where you've got the aggressor who's throwing these punches in bunches? That's what they call it, punches in bunches. And the opponent just backs up. Does the opponent who's just backing up ever win that? No. You're just allowing your opponent to throw more punches, and control the ring. Same thing in 40K. If your opponent is fast and is going at you and you just continuously back up, that game's lost. You're giving all the board position to your opponent. So we have to fight this freaking instinct. Playing reactively against this detachment is a really, really big mistake. You cannot allow them to control the board state. That is what the detachment is desperately wanting to do. So we're going to have to flip the script on them, and we're going to have to grab the board state. So let's figure out the weaknesses that we're going to be attacking. All right, these are the structural weaknesses of the Armored Speartip. Weakness number 1, 0, and I mean 0 bonuses to melee in this detachment. Whatever your unit has on its data sheet, that's what it's got. Plus Oath of Moment. It's because it's Space Marines, right? But there is no lance, there's no extra AP, there's no nothing at all. There's no combat buffs at all. It's a very, very big deal, which means that if you're a melee pressure army, get in melee. It is a huge, huge deal. In addition to the fact that they've got no way to buff or support their melee at all, they also have no access to freedom of movement outside of the transport's movements. So they can't fall back, shoot, and charge. They can't advance and charge anything, with the exception of the Land Raider moving, then disembarking. But the Land Raider's not advancing and charging. It's just you're able to get out and still charge after it advances. So you've got no real movement shenanigans outside of what the transports have. And yes, I know the transports have really, really powerful movement shenanigans, but your infantry does not. Then we have tiny, tiny model count. This is a big point of weakness for this army. It will be a low unit count army. Land Raider Redeemers, which is the useful Land Raider, is 270 points. A Storm Raven is 280 points. Just the tax alone to even build this army is at least 2 of those things. So you're looking at over 500 points of your armies in 2 transports. And every stratagem, everything about your army operates around those 2 transports. So when they're gone, your opponent's out of tricks, out of shenanigans. In most of these detachments, I'm going to suspect that you're going to see actually 3 of the transports, and that's an even bigger tax. So what you have to understand is that this army is going to be low model counts, and they're going to have really, really big issues. They're going to have to guarantee they're not going to be able to screen very effectively. As a matter of fact, in order to fix that, I'd be willing to bet you're going to see 1 to even 2 infiltrator units in these detachments. But even with that, man, that's just more expensive units that aren't really doing any other job, which severely decreases the amount of board presence that they're going to have. So grabbing board control against this army is clutch. It's key to absolutely everything. You want to make sure all of their chaff dies as quickly as possible. Force these Land Raiders to stand on these objectives and do actions, and stay on the objectives to score primary. Weakness number 3. They have very, very burst front-loaded power. They do not have much staying power. When you look at Land Raiders, they don't have much in the way of killing. Yes, I know a Land Raider Redeemer, actually quite good infantry killing, specifically in a Land Raider Redeemer, but they don't really have advance and shoot in this detachment. They don't have fallback and shoot in this detachment. It's got a really good overwatch, and it can deliver models after they get out and charge, right? And the models can then get out and charge, but they don't have good anti-vehicle, anti-monster killing power in this detachment, with the exception of 1 unit. And there's 1 really good unit that they have. So in this detachment, there's an enhancement that you can give to a Gravis model. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you it's an Apothecary Biologus that will give the unit sustained. Apothecary Biologus gives the unit lethal. Lead a unit of Eradicators, boom. They get out of the heavy transport, use a stratagem to give them +1 to hit and +1 to wound. Full rolls to hit, wound, and damage with lethal and sustained. And then they have a 1 CP stratagem to re-embark inside the transport. That is the damage combo that this detachment has, which leads us into weakness number 3. They have crazy power to dominate the board and move everywhere early in the game if they have the CP for it, and only if they have the CP available for it. This detachment requires, like, if you're playing Ultramarines, Marnius Calgar, because you have to have 2 CP in the turn. If you're running it as Dark Angels, you must have Azrael. These are very expensive characters that they cannot afford to pay for in these detachments if you want to make these combos go off. In addition to that, these combinations fall to pieces the second there is no CP available for them, which means Vect Auras. If you have access to Vect Auras, intelligently positioning your Vect Auras across the battlefield is critical. The ability to advance and then still get out is a different stratagem than the ability to move through walls or engagement range. You can make those 2 CP that they would have cost 4, which means that the detachment just ceases to exist effectively. Then the next one is objective control gaps. These land raiders and everything, they're pushing forward, but they're going to lose the ability to also control their home field really, really quickly, which means that your deep strikers and your flankers are going to be able to get to them very, very rapidly. So be aware of that. Now, there's one more thing that I didn't put here because I kind of ran out of space on the screen. So this is the most important one. So listen to my words. Be with me. Be with me. What we're about to say is critical to winning this matchup. They have a stratagem to allow their transports to ignore engagement range, but they still cannot end a move within engagement range or on top of your models. This means you can absolutely still move block them even though you think you can't. Let me show you how this works. So I'm just going to actually go back to this very first picture that we have here, and I'm going to enlarge it, and I'm going to use this to really drive my point home for you. Let me make sure. All right, cool. So if you see how this land raider goes through, this is assuming a 6-inch advance, by the way. A land raider is 7 or 6.5 inches long, which means if you have a single model within 8.4 inches of it, it cannot end its movement there. It also cannot end its movement inside of walls. One combi lieutenant standing right here means that this land raider cannot do this move. Sure, he could come up this way, but what if I have a 70-point squad of scouts? Or I have, I don't know, a Pathfinder squad in Tau. Or I have a unit of Goremongers in World Eaters. Or I have a unit of Commandos in Orcs. This move is instantaneously shut down. There's nothing that they can do about this because the Land Raider still cannot end within engagement range, and he still cannot end on your models, which means it just couldn't do this movement, even if it has the movement to get that far. Even if it rolls the 6 on the advance, it still couldn't do this. Now, personally, I recommend doing it something like this, stringing out, and just accepting that your scouting squad or your infiltrating squad dies turn 1. It's okay. Give up the Storm Hostile and Overwhelming Force. It's okay because this means that you don't lose the game turn 1, and it also really screws your opponent because once that you charge and you tag this thing, it can't fall back and do anything. It's stuck where it is. You can totally move block in this attachment even though you think you can't. All right, let's go back to the weaknesses slide. So I want to talk about the strategic approach to the game. So here we have it. You can't play defense, guys. This is an incredibly offensive army that has very little defense, which is kind of counterintuitive because, Land Raiders are known for being durable. Your Storm Ravens are very durable, but it's an army that cannot handle the pressure back. It delivers the pressure, but if you put the pressure on it, it will crumble and it will fold. And remember, this is all wrapped up under the concept that, yes, I understand, incredibly strong detachment, but this is how we have to play against it. So first off, you got to deny the alpha. Exactly what I just showed you. Move block where they land. If you go first, tag their stuff early. If you're worried about them like countercharging and hero intervening and stuff, that means that they're not having enough units to actually make use of all of their detachment rules. They can't afford a Judiciary with a unit of Blade Guard veterans and then still make sure everything works. And even if they can't afford that, It doesn't matter because they have no stratagem support for it, so you can just play around it. Accept their abilities. Do not run away from them. Now, this is one of the biggest things that I think I ever really started counseling people on. Back when Inari was a really big deal. If you don't remember, I'll quickly refresh your memory. They had an ability that if you killed any of their units, which is an Eldar army, in shooting, then at the end of the shooting phase, any one of their units could just make a normal move. So what they would inevitably do is you would shoot like a trash unit like Rangers, and they would die. And then they would get a free like 20-inch move with their Wave Serpent, which meant that in their turn, they would then move 20 inches with it, and then they would disembark and obliterate whatever they saw. That was a busted mechanic, and so many people were so afraid of them using their abilities, they would do things like, oh, I don't know, not shoot infantry, because otherwise they would get free movement. And you would always lose with that. If you don't kill their models, they literally can't lose because they're going to be standing on objectives. They're going to be denying you. They'll be trying to kill you, trust me. Not killing your opponent is not a very intelligent way to win the war. So what you have to understand is, yes, they've got Machine War, this ability for them to make a normal move when they are destroyed. They can still only end the movement where they can legally end the movement. So you can still screen where they can land. You have to accept the fact that your opponent has strong abilities. Accept it. Don't try to play to avoid it. You can't avoid it, because if you do play to avoid it, that just means you're not killing your opponent's relevant units, and they're going to run straight through you. So accept their abilities. Don't run away from them. Then we're going to recognize melee as the kill switch. Once you contact their disembarked infantry, boom. That's it. They've got no fallback, shoot, and charge. They've got nothing that they can do about it. Once you tag their transports, boom, the transports are stuck in engagement range, and they are there. So you have to get to them. Melee pressure armies are actually going to handle this detachment quite well. So I have this term here called multi-vector pressure. It's a very fancy way of saying something that is basically saying, hey, you're going to force your opponent to focus on multiple problems, right? What I mean by that is if I have my high-pressure melee units that are going in to threaten my opponent's army, but I also have my trash that's tying them up in engagement range and holding the objectives, your opponent in this detachment that doesn't really have that many options for dealing with multiple things at once is going to be stretched extremely thinly. Force them to answer too many things that they can't answer all at once. And then what you got to recognize that their critical turn for this army is really turn 2. That's their go turn. If you have ways to deplete their CP, if you have ways to tie them up in their deployment zone, which almost every army in the game does. Yes, rest in peace, Custodes. I understand you're screwed here. I get it. Sorry, I actually do feel for you. And but the thing is, I accept this is the strongest attachment in the game. Sorry. Anyway, but once you've done this, once you've depleted their CP, once you've tied them up, they really collapse very, very quickly. If you do this, you will be successful against this army. That's just the way it's going to be. So when we're building lists, let's talk about how to build lists specifically for this army, because this will define the meta. So we're going to have to consider this army as we're wrapping up the meta of 10th edition. Things that you really want to consider: high threat radius hammers that contest objectives before the boxes arrive. Let me explain what I mean by that. So I'm just going to quickly go back to the beginning of this presentation, and I'm going to take a second to demonstrate with this here. So let me just delete these little dots. All right, well, I'm going to replace these with red dots, actually. So we're screening like this, right? And then I take a unit of Sanguinary Guard, and I throw them right here. At this point, my opponent's Land Raider has no ability to interact with me over here. They literally can't do it. And yes, I know there's other scenarios, like guys can come up here, but you have other troops that can come down here as well, all right? Which means you don't need to be standing on an objective to threaten an objective. My Sanguinary Guard, which would be this green dot for all of everyone who's watching this, is now threatening to control this. They're threatening to kill this, and they're threatening to control this, and they're threatening to control this. My Land Raider here, or your opponent's Land Raider, has no ability to interact with you, and they don't have any melee army units that can rush into you, or they're just running a bad list if they do, because they have no support for it. And they have no real ability to do anything. So right now, your pressure is completely controlling these objectives, even without being exposed and on the objectives. So units like this are incredibly, incredibly relevant to controlling it. So you want to think about things like that. Fast melee with advance and charge or scout moves. You match how fast they are and all the pressure they get to bring. Bring the pressure, match their pressure. Cheap OC screens, like we talked about, scouts, commandos, Rangers, whatever trash that you have that could just stop the Land Raiders from landing early, boom. Anti-infantry volume, if you got strong overwatches, there are things that you can do to really ruin this person's day. So that Eradicator blob is, and perhaps a unit of Stern Guard that could come out of a Storm Raven, are the real threats for damage output in this army, in these armies. So if you have the ability to set up overwatches to deal with those problems, you're going to be feeling really, really good in this army. Like a Forge Fiend in CSM will delete just like 3 to 4 Eradicators when it shoots it. If you're next to Abaddon, you'll delete everything, right? A Ball Predator, if you're playing Blood Angels, will kill like 4 or 5 Stern Guard when the Stern Guard jump out of the Storm Raven. So you got to position those things as well. Board control is everything you're thinking about here. And then the Vect Aura. What you got to remember is that this army lives and dies on its CP usage. If you deplete its CP usage, the game's all yours. All right. Now, 2 things I want you guys to really consider avoiding in these types of matchups, and this is just general list building advice right now, is units that need a static fire base. Now, this is actually really good advice for all list building. If you have a slow-moving unit that has really strong firepower, but it's only moves like 4 inches, since you're in Devastators, for example, generally not a great plan, especially against a hyper-mobile army like this. They're just going to run circles around you. They're going to avoid you, and then they're going to blitzkrieg you. So those types of units are not particularly valuable unless you get access to like uppy downy shenanigans. Then you know the nuance changes. And then the last thing that we're not really going to concern ourselves with in this matchup is slow moving melee threats, because these guys are going to have a really, really hard time getting to provide the pressure that you need in order to deal with this army. So that's what I want you to consider prioritizing and not necessarily worrying too much about in the list building step of dealing with the Armored Speartip. So let's bring it all together, okay? Speartip is super strong because it's forcing your opponent to make 2 bad choices. If you watched my video last week on how to force your opponent to make bad choices, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Effectively, they're saying, hey, if you shoot me, then my transport gets to move, and I'm going to outposition you, and I'm going to win. And if you're afraid of my forward pressure and you back off and you back up to make it harder for me to get to you, great, I'm going to take board control and I'm going to win. That's the bucket they're trying to put you in. What I recommend is you flip the freaking script on them. Make it so that they can't give you that forward pressure because you literally just move block where they can stand. And then lastly, once this machine war thing where they get to this reactive move, bro, just like position in places that when you shoot it, there's no great place for them to move, or they got to move backwards, which is giving up board control. Now, I will completely admit that this is much more challenging when your opponent is running Storm Ravens, but like I said, this is the strongest detachment in the game. So if you're seeing a lot of Storm Ravens, it does get trickier. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it gets much trickier, and I completely recognize that. So that's the thing, guys. This is what I want you to consider. When you're running this army, do not get over-intimidated like you don't have ways to play it. You've got amazing options of how to deal with this. Keep your head cool, play into the strengths of your army, play into the weaknesses of your opponent's army. Only a fool attacks an opponent where they're strong, so we want to attack them where they're weak. This is the way of dominance. So, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, share it with your friends, subscribe, and with that, crump on. Bye-bye.